Our next speaker is the first person in history to be a two-time Sixposium presenter. Fresh off the high of last year's presentation, Nicole Tremaglio.
Found my water. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Nicole. If you don't already know me, thank you for the amazing introduction, Ruby. Yes, that is true. I am the first and only two-time Sixposium presenter. Last year, my presentation was called Social Media Ruins Everything, and I made a poetry book of Drake's lyrics that were inspired by his book, Titles Ruin Everything, which really didn't give us what we needed. What we needed was a poetry book filled with Drake lyrics. And I talked about the proliferation of the proliferation of social media in tandem with Drake's career ascent. And so one of the slides that I'd included talked about how emo Drake was born. And that is where the tissue box idea came from. I saw a meme with Drake on a tissue box, and I thought, I need one of those that I can just have forever because it's so important to me. And when we talk about the end of Drake, that might be something that upsets people a little bit. So if anybody needs to cry for any reason, I have the tissues right here. So laugh now, cry later. You might know that as one of Drake's songs, but what we're talking about today is the character development of Jimmy Brooks and Drake. Quick pulse check. Who here has seen Degrassi? Okay, heard of it. So that's more than I was expecting, to be honest with you. A little background about me as well. I'm not Canadian, but I was a longtime fan of Degrassi. I was a diehard Degrassi fan in high school, and I was going to meet, not Drake, Aubrey Graham at a fan event at a mall. He had a scheduling conflict because he got busy being who would go on to become Drake. So we've never met in person, but we were MySpace friends. And that's just a very important detail that I would like to add as a premier pop culture and specifically Drake scholar. So getting started. That's a good question. Oh, scroll. Okay. All right. Perfect. Scrolling down. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So quick little disclaimer. This is not necessarily an endorsement or an idealization of Drake's behaviors, his statements, his lyrics, his tweets, etc. This is more so an intentional observation of a consistent pop culture phenomenon, the cyclical patterns in entertainment and media consumption, and what this says about us and our society at large. So laugh now, cry later. You know, in 2010, Drake said it's far from over. But what about now? That was over 50 or about 15 years ago. It's been over 15 years into this career. And this is not the first time that Aubrey Graham has had to undergo a very public shift in his identity. Once becoming a rapper from being a teen actor. But yeah, we're going to see where he goes next from here and kind of examine those parallel tracks of the first 8 seasons of Jimmy Brooks, the Degrassi character, and the first 8 seasons of Aubrey Graham's most prolific character yet, Drake. So as you can see, I have scientific graphs on the screen. You can see Aubrey Graham was a season regular cast member, seasons 1 through 7 of Degrassi The Next Generation from 2001 to 2007. And he made one guest appearance in an episode for about 5 seconds. You blink and you might miss him in 2008. And so here you can see the percentage of episodes, season 1 through season 8. You start out strong. Season 2, you peak. Season 3 through 7, there's a steady decline. Finally, a drop off at season 8. And we can see Drake similarly his number of studio albums. When I talk about Drake's seasons here, just because his career has spanned a larger number of years, we're looking at it in 2-year increments. So in 2011, you're really seeing Drake become ubiquitous and inextricably linked with the music industry as it became as we know it today. To summarize, season 1 is that breakthrough debut, 2 is a mainstream success, 3 is continued achievement, 4, there's a major shift, 5 is adapting to a new landscape, 6 is overcoming limitations, 7 is facing a crossroads, and finally, season 8, moving on. So when we ask the question, is this the end of Drake? Why now? The character cycle is complete. So let's start in season 1. Season 1, Jimmy Brooks comes onto the scene. He's a star athlete. He's popular. He comes from a wealthy family. Everything is set up perfectly for him. Not in this particular scene. You'll find that a lot of Degrassi references I make here are taken completely out of context. That's just our little inside joke. And season 1 of Drake, he kind of has to face that same entrance onto a scene. Like he already has the wealth and the social standing and the connections in order to get where he needs to go. And he's only going up from here. Season 2, you will find the peak of appearances made by the character of Jimmy Brooks. And you will also find Drake, again, really hitting his stride. This is where emo Drake is born. And Drake's kind of late night confessional style, this is really what becomes his signature. This differentiates him from other rappers in the space. And at this point, people still really love to see him shine. Season 3, there's some layered and complex dynamics that come into play. There's on Degrassi, there's Jimmy's relationship with his girlfriend, Ashley. There's interpersonal conflict with his best friend, Spinner, as pictured. They had actually just done a rap in this episode. So that's why they're smiling. They're very proud of themselves, even though the audience to which they performed was horrified. But Drake is really feeling himself in this era too. And at the same time, this kind of embroilment in these early feuds that Drake is having and Jimmy Brooks being involved in the politics of high school, the actions that happen in this season are starting to set him up for a critical turning point. And using Drake's feuds as an example, it's going to set him up in a place where it's going to impact his reputation and how he is perceived by others, usually for the worse. Season 4, inarguably, if anyone is triggered by the left picture, I have the tissues. If you are not familiar, this is the final frame that is shown on Degrassi The Next Generation in season 4 before Jimmy is shot by a school shooter and paralyzed from the waist down. And so obviously this is a critical turning point in the character of Jimmy. His career arc, he was a star basketball player. And so now he has to grapple with the physical, mental, emotional ramifications of a major traumatic, life-changing event. Drake, in the context of his career, this is when we really started to see how the primary methods of music consumption and distribution changed. And so this period was a complete turning point for Drake because streaming started to really be on the ascent, and Drake was at the forefront of that. He was the most streamed artist of Spotify's first 10 years from 2008 to 2018 and of the 2010s. Now he doesn't even break the top 10. So take that as you will. But this is the big turning point right in the middle where there's a lot of other factors that are going to go into consideration going forward. Season 5, Jimmy is adapting to this new life. He didn't really form an identity outside of playing basketball. And so due to that's him shooting free throws in his driveway and he misses every one. And then his dad's like, what's going on? Know who he is outside of basketball. And so he says, okay, I have to not yet accept, but at least understand that there's a new reality that I'm going to have to step into. And so Jimmy's a creative person and he's able to start to explore these artistic and creative pursuits. He does drawing. It's before he really truly gets into music and into rapping, but same with Drake. He's just trying to adapt. And with streaming, there's a competitive and now saturated landscape. Also, with the democratization of these streaming platforms, anybody can put out their song on TikTok and blow up overnight, or anybody can become a celebrity, so to speak, because what the word celebrity meant started to change. Season 6. This is when Jimmy says, okay, this is my reality. I know that I'm not going to be able to go to college for basketball. I'm going to pursue my drawing. I'm going to pursue my music. And I'm not going to get into the fan theories of the people that think that Drake is actually Jimmy and that I know. And so, well, okay, I guess I am going to get into it. But yeah, people are like, okay, once Jimmy went through this life-changing event as a coping mechanism, he developed the persona of Drake and went on to become Drake. You know, I'm not gonna give my stance. I'm gonna let you make your own assumptions about that and just let that marinate for a little bit. But either way, Aubrey is at the core. They say that when you go through a traumatic event, we were just talking about this a little earlier, that you kind of have this arrested development and remain frozen in time. And hence why we see Drake being kind of juvenile sometimes, because he's still this character that he played from when he was 14 years old or whatever is still inside of him. Season 7, we're starting to look forward. Jimmy Brooks is upset here because he was making his rap demo and he was working with his former girlfriend, and she sang and she gave the CD to the record executives and cut his verse from it. And he found out and he was very disappointed. And so these common themes of loyalty and trust and betrayal, they showed up a lot for Jimmy and they show up a lot for Drake, who has the little heart in his hair at this point. And Drake is trying to adapt as well. Drake is trying, you can tell he's going through something in this picture. And he's going through something and he has to be able to adapt. And sonically, he's trying. Sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't. He started, I'm just going to say, appropriating various influences sonically that he had not touched before, just to try to show people that he was adapting in some sense. When he released More Life, okay, it's a playlist, not a traditional album. And everyone's like, but all of these albums are so long. They're so long and everything sounds the same. But yes, so he is already dropping off at this point. Finally, season 8. You might miss the cameo. There are only 2 characters ever in Degrassi history where they're even mentioned at all after their departure. And of course, Jimmy being one of them. He graduated high school. He moved on. Obviously with a TV show, your character arc clearly comes to an end. And yeah, that is Drake with his son, Adonis. I think that there was a layer of responsibility that was added there when he became well, when he started associating himself with his son, when he became a father and when he became a father figure are two different timelines. Again, I know. I know. Well, we are going to talk a little bit more about his son, actually. So that wraps up the arcs, the parallel arcs. Next. So Jimmy, again, unless it's a certain fan theory, the world of Jimmy and the world of Drake don't often overlap. However, Drake's 2018 song, I'm Upset, featured a music video where basically they're prepping for like a class reunion, like school dance kind of thing. And it's on the Degrassi school set. And Drake reached out to all of his former castmates and said, hey, I'm doing this Degrassi themed music video. Only one of them said no because he thought it was a scam and was like, no, I'm not doing that. But everybody else showed up. It was their first time being united in 10 years. And so fans like me love that because I grew up with all these characters. And it's funny because he says in this song, I'm Upset, I still got like 7 years of doing what I want. And for 7 years, he did do what he wanted from Degrassi as a main character from 2001 to 2007. And then again, since I'm Upset came out, how many years since 2018 until next year? 7 years. That's crazy. So he had 7 years of doing what he wanted. And then next year he's like, oh. So obviously Drake is upset because he's like, what's going to happen next year? My life, my career, as I knew it, this character has run its course and time is up. It's over. So where do we go from here? First of all, the reasons why he's upset, sonic repetition. As one YouTuber, one YouTube commenter put it, they're like, oh my God, I love that trumpet sound. It's so nostalgic. And I'm like, I can't believe a song from 10 years ago, like Fancy and Over, even using another song reference, like Kanye's All of the Lights. And people are like, oh, trumpet. I'm like, oh, wow. So it's nostalgic at best, but like an outdated sign of the times at worst. Again, all of his albums are too long. The songs sound too much like the same. The sonic repetition, it's reached a breaking point. Something has to evolve. Meme fatigue. Last year, my presentation was all about Drake's sustained relevance on social media. He used to just be a millennial on the internet, good thing, but now he's a millennial on the internet, bad thing, unfortunately. And so just like any hyper accelerated micro aesthetic or trend, all good things on the internet must come to an end. Legacy sandwich. Drake also said, I'm really too young to be feeling this old. And I feel like that's gotten truer as time has gone on. He's never really been an underdog, and he's never really been somebody who was kind of like this. I mean, he was 25 sitting on 25 mil. Like, where do you go from there? So he's not quite old enough to be having a midlife crisis yet. That's something we can maybe, I don't want to say look forward to. I'm not trying to look to his demise or anything. However, he's just like in that sandwich generation of like, he's not an ingenue, and then he's not exactly someone that we're going to be handing a lifetime achievement award to anytime soon. Or maybe they will, I don't know. All right. So where do we go from here? What is God's plan? What is God's plan for Drake? There's a lyric that says something about him being the good guy. And I think that being a good guy instead of like a toxic, like, you know, his are you up right now? Like, that's not, again, he just like 38. That's not going to work for very much longer. Everyone's like, ew. So if he's the good guy, what can this look like? This can look like multiple things. Number one, if we're leaning into kind of the sonic repetition sore spot, this can be, remember when T-Pain came out with an album and everyone's like, you can sing without auto-tune and you sound way better. And what? And so I think that if Drake came back with like this crooning sound, and everyone's like, oh, that's so nice. And, took a little bit of a jazzy route. Like that could be an idea. That would be interesting. And then also good guy, not just sonically, but in his persona and in his reputation, again, as a father figure. I mean, his son literally like drew the album cover already, released his own rap song, and he is 7. So I think that whether Drake is planning on evolving into someone who's less toxic as a person, or if he's like, nah, and just passes the baton on to his son, either way, he's going to do what he needs to do to position himself in a more flattering light going forward as a good guy. Ball out. The main thing that Jimmy Brooks and Drake love is basketball. Why do they love basketball so much? They just do. Okay. And Drake has these connections already with the professional sports scene, especially basketball. And so is he going to be an investor? Is he going to continue to have basketball tournaments in his in-home basketball court? What is that going to look like? I don't know, but basketball. There's a pretty good chance the basketball is going to be part of it. And finally, the old Drake, what's that song? They say she says she misses the old Drake or whatever. And what that means to me is not like, oh, let's have Drake return to what he was like before sonically, but it's like, I liken it to when the singer Selena started singing in English. And everyone's like, wow, that's so amazing. She speaks English, but English is her first language. She was singing in Spanish to appeal to a different audience. And then when she was giving interviews in English, they're like, wow, you're really good. And she's like, I have been doing this. And so it's the same kind of thing where like people don't necessarily know. I think because I'm a millennial that grew up with Degrassi, I think, oh my God, everybody knows that Drake was an actor, and that's not the case. So there's going to be a lot of people now, especially who have been Drake fans maybe for 5 or not even 10 years, who have no idea that he can act, and he would be able to tap into his natural talent in a completely different way. And I think be able to impress people with his range and his depth. Again, we're not showing any of the Degrassi scenes today because then I will start bawling my eyes out. But there's definitely an opportunity there for him to showcase this depth and versatility that his music just simply will not allow. Yeah. Again, quote taken so out of context. However, he says, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. And I tend to agree with that to an extent. Stop hating and just deal. That's another one Drake has. And, to kind of touch on next presentation too, with the idea of feeding off of this negative attention. And when we have this attention economy where eyeballs and clicks matter and they drive careers and they line people's pockets with money, like how will Drake's trajectory change without beef and without the kind of negative attention, and especially adding the layer of parenthood and the judgment that comes along with that? How is that going to evolve? I think that if he goes in the direction to showcase more of who he is and his capabilities, that people may stop hating and just deal and let him age into the legacy act that he may one day become. One of my favorite quotes ever, just to you're like, wait, Jimmy Brooks, who? Drake? He's a good actor. I'm going to share my favorite quote with you, and you're going to be like, wow, the range. Thing is, life is random, and sometimes it's tragic and totally messed up. But there's one thing that makes all the drama and tears worthwhile. If you're lucky enough to find someone you love who loves you back, it's a gift. Like Drake said that. And I think he should have the opportunity to be able to say something that profound again in whatever his next character will be. And Drake, take care. Thank you guys. That is my book that I came out with. Feel free to ask me about it. That is just Aubrey Graham circa 2005. Yeah, I'm a pop culture writer. I have a newsletter. I have a podcast called Nostalgia. Yeah, I love pop culture scholarship. Thank you, Ruby, for the opportunity to come back to Sixposium and present. And yeah, take care, everybody.
Thank you so much. This was really, really wonderful.
Um, I think one of the things that I'm struck by this parallel is the idea that we continue perhaps acting and sort of the fine line between public personas as performances. Do you see this 7-year timeline as maybe the end of the performance or a continuation of the performance? What do you foresee in 2025 and forward?
It's a little meta, right? Because I've only known Aubrey Drake, not with the quotations, that's just his middle name. I've only known Aubrey Drake Graham as an actor. And so to see him continue on with Drake, it's starting to look less of, oh, okay, he stepped out of Jimmy to become who he really is, who is Drake. To be like, no, actually, Drake is just as much of a character as Aubrey is. And so that is the crossroads that we're facing right now as we go into 2025 is whatever Aubrey pursues next. Like if he's going to go on to win an Academy Award or whatever, I see it happening as Aubrey Graham. And is he going to take back ownership over his own name and define himself based upon that instead of this kind of like inflated persona that Drake grew to be? It definitely grew bigger than any of us anticipated.
I'm curious if you've seen in I know you do a lot of research on pop culture, any other similar sort of movements from acting to music, and whether or not they keep the persona of their most famous character, or how that usually plays out.
I feel like with acting, like it depends on what the focus of that person is. Like if you're, a lot of people would use, I hate that Jennifer Lopez is the first example that comes to mind because that's a whole separate presentation. But some actors would utilize, and this is, I'm using primarily the 90s as an example, just due to the state of mass media at the time, but certain singers would, or it would mostly be actors and singers, like they would want to pursue the other thing, right? So whatever you are, you would use that as an avenue to get you to wherever you wanted to go. And so if anything, it's like you're willing to shed whatever character, like J-Lo was Selena in the movie, and you have to be able to shed that persona to step into your new one. I do think maybe there might have been some just like little pieces. I think that, I mean, just even as people, not as brands or personas, everywhere that you've ever had a job, every person you've ever been in a relationship with, you learned something from them. And you don't necessarily internalize that and carry it with you and make every single thing that's ever happened to you a part of your identity. But there are these tiny little bits and pieces that kind of weave together to form who you are. You get to decide what those things are. But I think that in his case, Drake's case, going from immediately from this character to the rapper, I mean, people forget he was a child actor. And like there was no time in the middle to like process the fact that, I don't want to say he didn't have a childhood, but like you're always pretending to be somebody else. And you don't get a break from that in his case. He might need a break from I forgot to mention he was saying how he had tummy issues last year. What happened to that? What happened to that? I thought he was going to have to take, this would have been a completely different presentation. I thought he was going to have to take a break due to tummy issues. I don't think he did. Drake stand-up comedy routine coming up next. Jeez.
I have a question. You just mentioned that he may not have had time to process that experience, part. And it brings me to the question of like whether or not Aubrey knows who he really is outside of the character he played in life, and whether or not that has an impact on how he moves forward, and if he moves forward, especially given Kendrick's situation where he's basically calling out that you're playing a role, you're, tapping into other people's cultures and gentrifying them and basically using them as your own.
I saw a YouTube video last night that dove into a topic that was very parallel to this presentation and just this year's Sixposium in general. And someone was like, yeah, he has those basketball tournaments because Jimmy Brooks could never play basketball. And it's like, yeah, I think that there's definitely some disappointment or resentment that you have when it's like, you might be disappointed if you're trying to become a superstar rapper and then you fail, or you have a beef and you lose, or like, it's hard when there are setbacks. There's also challenges when you win. And I think Drake is a very good example of that. Someone whose personal growth, perspective, evolution has been hindered by his success.
Yeah, I think in a roundabout way, I think it's our good friend Toby Shorn has this essay, I think, called After Authenticity, or About Authenticity, where he sort of tries to explain this quite very millennial desire to have like these authentic figures that we can look towards. And I think the prime counterexample is Drake, in spite of being like a millennial figure, has been able to not engage in the same sort of like revelatory singer-songwriter type thing that's like Taylor Swift does very, very well, which is just speak about your own experience and speak very vulnerably about it. And so I don't know that if we're going back to like this Chapel Roan, sort of a new example of this like now Zoomer or alpha authenticity. And what does that mean for a person who is decidedly not an actor, decidedly not a person on the stage? But then again, we have performance, right? We have like the drag element in Chapel Roan's, and that is also a performance in of itself. Especially once you made off the wall and
You know what's funny? I just mentioned that YouTube video that I saw recently. That point was mentioned as well. The construction of Michael Jackson's Neverland or whatever. We don't, that's a separate presentation. But that construction as, what is this manifestation of childhood through a second degree projection? Like, if you didn't have it, how do you create it? It's based on what people are telling you. And it's still, just as your adulthood was, based upon the projections of others, based on their perception of you. So it's like this whole, how can you really create like, if you can create something authentic, it's rooted, if we're talking about from Michael Jackson's perspective, it's rooted in lack, because you're only gathering from what did not happen. You're only gathering kind of like these optimistic figments of your imagination that you would hope that certain thing, I want a merry-go-round or something. Like, you think of what would have made me happy. And that doesn't always correlate to what would make me happy as an adult. And as an adult, I have people in my ear constantly telling me what I need to be and what I need to like. So it's kind of like, even if you have this construction of this artificial childhood, it doesn't change the fact that you're kind of still in the same position as you always were. Absolutely. Yeah. It can go one of two ways. It can expand into something even greater. It can also have like a boomerang effect. As we were talking about, what is kind of like that Gen Alpha sensibility going to be? And in just looking into like a generational theory, you often see kids, and the uncoolest thing you could ever be is your parent. And so all of our millennial sensibilities, there's going to be a contrast. There's going to be a push and pull. What came before obviously informs where he goes from here. But I think that also pop culture has a very short memory. And I just read an article recently talking about my former career was in the fashion industry, and it talks about how no one can ever actually get canceled in fashion, and even people who have done have committed crimes and done really heinous things. Like there's always somebody out there who's really supportive of them. And there's actually a beautiful book called Monster by Claire Dederer. And I love examining this monster paradigm, essentially meaning how willing are we to separate the artist from the art? Michael Jackson's a great example of this. So I think that people forget things, especially when they want to.
I think Drake is going to do large scale figurative paintings, and he's going to be represented by Pace Gallery.
Yes. Well, I think Drake is always going to be trying to show people that he's authentic. And even if you think you know him, there's like still more to the story. And something that I found out that was very interesting is when Jimmy was shot, they planted a small, I forget the exact, planted a small explosive on his back. And then, it went off. And so it's like he wasn't shot, but he felt the impact of the explosive. And so when his back, like when he arches his back to showcase like the impact of the bullet, he felt that. And I think that in his mind, he felt that. I think he felt that. And it's like, you weren't really shot because like 50 Cent, for example, you have a narrative. You're like, this is my story. This is how I came up. I was shot. I lived in this neighborhood. Like, this is who I am. But I think in Drake's mind, like, he really feels like the performance is real.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nicole. I love this. I mean, this is tying in so many of the themes from today. This idea of performance, like the post Andy Kaufman world of like, where does the actor end? When does the new figure begin? The inability for young people to sort of, I have a lot of my research on fantasy, like this inability we have to separate fantasy from reality. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.